You can't accuse India of being a tariff abuser and at the same time expect a strong U.S.-India relationship, particularly in regard to China and other threats to the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region. I think that Prime Minister Modi and his administration know President Trump very well. They know how to flatter him, whether it be with Howdy Modi or Gujarat conventions, and they will come up with something which at least defers any immediate adverse impact on U.S.-India economy. Economic relations. That's at least my hope, and I think the most likely outcome in view of the president's comments today. I think Prime Minister Modi, Minister Jaishankar, Minister Goyal have all done masterful diplomatic jobs in terms of dealing with what I would consider to be a very difficult personality in regard to President Trump.
Ray Vickery, the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development, on the upcoming U.S.-India reciprocal tariffs. Ray, thank you so much for talking to me, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
President Trump claims that the tariffs will work out very well between India and the U.S. What is your assessment of this comment that he made earlier today on the overall tariffs that he is going to announce next week? What can we expect?
Well, I think you can expect more of the same that you've seen, and that is a chaotic approach to international trade in destruction, really, of the World Trade Organization, and in favor of bilateral deal making. That having been said, there has been progress made in the bilateral talks between India and the United States. And as you know, Prime Minister Modi and Minister Jaishankar and Minister Goyal have all been very attentive to Trump. They know him from his first term, and they have endeavored to make it so that one, President Trump feels flattered, and two, to give him something that he can hold up as a triumph. So I don't know exactly how he thinks he's going to square the circle. He says that he's going to announce these reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd. And yet at the same time, you have the government of India saying, well, we're moving toward an agreement in September. My best guess is that, as in the past, the can will get kicked down the road and there won't be anything immediate, although there will be a bluster about how America First is being applied to the economic relations between the U.S. and India. It's my hope that the relationship, of course, will continue to be strengthened economically. I don't see a separation really between strategic matters and trade matters. They're all part of the same reality. And you can't accuse India of being a tariff abuser and at the same time expect a strong U.S.-India relationship, particularly in regard to China and other threats to the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region.
What key sectors in the past, and what key sectors do you think that will be impacted the most? And how do you think these tariffs will be different from the previous U.S.-India trade negotiations or trade talks, as we call it?
Well, hopefully, India and the U.S. are going to move toward a lessening of tariffs across the board. That'll be good, particularly for pharmaceuticals. It'll be good. It should be good for auto parts. Yet at the same time, Trump says that he's negotiating, expects a good outcome in U.S.-India talks. He's slamming the rest of the world in regard to automobiles and auto parts. As you know, there is a booming manufacturing sector in India in regard to automotive parts. And that should be an area which is benefited by these talks. But as I said earlier, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be an overall ethos and strategy for the U.S.-India economic relations. It's one of a transaction, and what do we get today, and what can we hold up as a victory for the president? Again, though, I think that Prime Minister Modi and his administration know President Trump very well. They know how to flatter him, whether it be with Howdy Modi or Gujarat conventions, and they will come up with something which at least defers any immediate adverse impact on U.S.-India economy, economic relations. That's at least my hope, and I think the most likely outcome in view of the president's comments today.
Now, you said, this has played out before, and it's often pushed under the rug when it comes to, a trade deal between the two nations. What are the potential economic consequences for U.S. and India businesses across technology, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and manufacturing if things go south on April 2nd?
Well, if they go south, which is kind of what happened in the first term of Trump, as you know, there had been movement toward a lessening of trade barriers, toward an agreement that was something like a free trade agreement, and it collapsed at the end. I don't expect that to happen at this time, but if it did, I think it would be disastrous because right now, India is still a very fast-growing economy, has a great trade surplus with the United States, and it's a part of an ever-increasing partnership between these two largest and I think greatest democracies in the world. The idea that somehow, though, that India has to bend to the Trump view of what is America first is very troubling. You can't have a situation in which America first only means first, last, and only, and what happens immediately. As you know, Prime Minister Modi and India have been strong supporters of the World Trade Organization, which had a due process, rule of law approach to trade. That seems to be going out the window. And if you just take a look, for example, at pharmaceuticals, that is an area in which India is really should be the pharmaceutical resource for the world. But if you are going to use that trade, it's going to have harmful effects, not only in U.S.-India relations, but the health and well-being of people across the world and in the United States. And you can take other sectors as well. Manufacturing, we've been trying to reach an agreement with India in regard to semiconductor manufacturing. In the Biden administration, there was a great movement toward friend sourcing. That means moving from an adversary like China to a friend like India. and there were attempts to, if you will, make sure that there wasn't a conflict between the America First agenda and the Make in India agenda in regard to semiconductors. So that is an area in which we ought to be able to increase manufacturing, increase trade, and shore up the relationship, make it even stronger. But it remains to be seen whether or not this is actually going to come about, because the Trump administration, even though they say it's bilateral with India, they keep doing things across the board, saying reciprocity is going to apply to everybody equally, that you aren't going to have the imports in regard to automobiles and automobile parts. And as I said, the parts manufacturing is a very important part of the U.S.-India relationship now. And you can go on to machine tools, you can go on to the traditional areas in terms of gyms, in terms of textiles. But what Trump seems to be doing is looking for sort of headlines, as you know. He's talked, and already he's gotten some concession on Harley Davidson motorcycles coming in, pistachios from and almonds from California. So I think what you're going to have is a mix of concessions, some lowering of tariff barriers, which are very welcome because India has been a high tariff nation. But you're going to have to really look below the hood, if you will, to figure out exactly where it comes, because there doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason at this point in terms of what the strategy is. Is trade being used to strengthen a relationship with a great democracy like India, or is it being used to browbeat Canada into being the 51st state, or is it being used to really cut Europe off from a security umbrella? Or is it being used for fentanyl? All of these things have been cited as goals. Immigration, what is going to happen with India in regard to services? The free movement of technical workers between India and the U.S. is vital both to India in regard to its economic development and to the U.S. Industry. And yet there are voices within the administration who want to cut back on H-1B visas and want to really interfere with the services trade, which, as I say, bears on immigration. So it's a very dangerous time in regard to U.S.-India economic relations. I do believe that because the Prime Minister and his administration have diagnosed really the president's predilection so well, I think that there will be some progress. But we really need to move to something that is substantive, that has these two great democracies in something that approaches a free trade relationship, so that the resources, which are so great in India in terms of technical resources and even in manufacturing, just shifting defense production from just a sales arrangement to a Make in India. All of these things need to be addressed, but they can't be addressed simply with we're going to make a deal and we're going to come out on top, and we'll be able to say that a great victory has been achieved, which has been the history of what has happened so far in the first 2 months of the Trump administration.
Right. Now, from a geopolitical standpoint, how do these tariffs reshape the strategic relationship between the United States and India? You did talk about it briefly, but let's just dig in a little deeper and understand, from a geopolitical standpoint.
Well, I think this is really fundamental. When the U.S.-India relationship opened up in the early 1990s, it was really in large part driven by reforms in India, which made it possible to have an economic relationship which had not been in effect during the period of estrangement between the U.S. and India. I wrote a book on this, which was published in 2010, and I was the assistant secretary who worked with Ron Brown, Jeff Garten, and others to do the presidential trade missions, which opened it up. And that led then to a deal on civil nuclear, which in turn provided a level of trust between the U.S. and India, which has borne great fruit strategically. Now, it hasn't done as well commercially as it should. And that is a hopeful outcome of negotiations now. But the point is that the economic relationship has been a driver in the U.S.-India relationship. And it cannot be the case that the progress which we have made in U.S.-India relations will continue if there is this sledgehammer approach to India in regard to tariffs and economic trade, and indeed to the rest of the world. And you have the common interest in regarding to India. India's wanting to get China to play by the rules, that they don't just say Arunachal Pradesh belongs to China. And in regard to the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, that China is able to control that. And so the economic basis for the relationship, it's not solely the basis, but it is a very, very strong indicator of how the relationship will grow and continue. So if it does not happen, then what happens is that it becomes sort of every nation for itself. And everybody moves toward the Trump view, which is one of transaction. It's not the Trump view is transactional as opposed to relationships. If you were involved in a relationship, which the U.S. and India are and should be, then you try to work out something which is a proverbial win-win kind of situation, which benefits both parties. You may give something in order to have a strengthening of the relationship in another area, or you may forego something immediately for a long-term mutual benefit. That has not been the history of the way in which President Trump has approached international relations, and it's very bothersome. As I say, and I'll repeat, I think Prime Minister Modi, Minister Jaishankar, Minister Goyal have all done masterful diplomatic jobs in terms of dealing with what I would consider to be a very difficult personality in regard to President Trump. But that is no assurance that this is going to turn out right. So we have to see what happens on April 2nd. I believe that saner heads are going to prevail, and we'll move toward an overall agreement which really has been already posited for the fall. And I think it'll have a benefit, whether it be in defense production, whether it be in pharmaceuticals, whether it be in information technology assisted services. All of those areas are very strong parts of the U.S.-India economic relations and fundamental to the strategic relationship.
Now, you repeatedly talked about, the diplomatic leverage that India has used to handle the situation. Do you believe that sufficient diplomatic leverage has been used for these negotiations from the U.S. side? Is far more as compared to that in India? And what does this really signal about U.S.-India trade relations? Can we expect anything bigger? Like, you have reports saying there could be something, a deeper deal, probably next year.
Well, I think that India has parried the kind of leverage which which President Trump has tried to use, and the stock in trade for President Trump is, you need us, we don't need you. And that has been effective in some cases with some other nations, but I think India has not succumbed to that. I think that India, because of its size in terms of population and talent, because it is a growing market, whereas in the rest of the world you find a very difficult situation, whether it be in China or Europe, in terms of tapping into growth. Because it has moved to solve some of its infrastructure problems, it hasn't had to succumb to that kind of approach. Now, that having been said, it doesn't seem to me that India has been able to use the leverage which it has to get President Trump back into a rules-based approach and be able to have a relationship for the long run. As I say, basically, this transactional bilateral approach destroys the World Trade Organization and the mechanisms which had been put in place, thanks in large part to India being able to cooperate and work with other nations. And so what has happened is you've fallen back to a pre-World Trade Organization, a pre-multilateral approach to that which obtained in the early part of the 20th century. I think India is playing its hand within the 4 years of the Trump administration. We have to move back to a rules-based approach which takes a comprehensive look at world trade, as well as seeing immediate needs for strategic cooperation against a competitor such as China. And we don't have that at this point, and India hasn't been able to use its leverage to move the Trump administration. And to be fair, of course, nobody else in the world has either. But it's very early in the game. It's only two months into this. There's been great harm done so far, and hopefully at least the U.S.-India relationship is on a track to be able to ameliorate the harm which has been done to the world trading system.
Right. Now, you've observed and seen India's growth story over the last few decades now. How might these tariff policies influence India's economic positioning in the world?
Well, it's been more than a few decades. Actually, I was in India as a Fulbright student in the mid 60s. So I've seen it change completely. And I've seen the self-assurance grow in India of its economic capabilities. And hopefully what will happen is out of these negotiations and separate and apart from the sort of sledgehammer approach which the Trump administration has taken, there will be a progress toward freer trade between the United States and India. That will bear terrific benefits both to the common man and woman in India and the United States, and to being able to build peace and stability in the world. I think, of course, the danger is that the same thing that happened at the end of the first Trump administration will repeat itself. And that is that there will be an overreaching by the Trump administration trying to enforce its view of the world based upon a mistaken view that you can have a fortress America economically and continue prosperity. I think that would be a huge setback for the Indian economy as well as the U.S. We are now already feeling the impacts of the chaotic approach to tariffs in the United States economically. We've had some of the worst results with the Dow Jones and other indices in terms of stocks. And if you look at what consumer confidence is in the United States, it's plunging. So we're having that kind of impact. And India, likewise, it'll have an adverse impact on the Indian economy. It is not the case, even though some believe it to be the case, that India doesn't need the rest of the world. The fact is, the great engines of innovation are in the United States, and India needs to be able to tap into that technological innovation. The fact is that capital is needed, and the United States has capital for investment. Trade and investment go together. You can't have a situation in which trade plummets and the kind of investment which is needed to promote manufacturing and for other purposes, capital expenditures in India. You can't have that investment unless you're able to tap into stable and vibrant capital markets. So the knock-on effect of failure in regard to U.S.-India relations would be very serious for the economies both of India and the United States.
Right. My last question. Drawing from your experience in trade development, what recommendations would you give policymakers to mitigate the negative economic impacts of these tariffs if they go south?
Well, I think that what India has to do is to evaluate its position with the rest of the world as a hedge against the United States. There are pockets of growth in many areas of the world. Europe, even though it hasn't moved forward as rapidly as it would want to, needs very much the same kind of support in regard to IT and IT assisted services that the United States does. If you look at the kinds of leadership that Prime Minister Modi has provided in regard to the global South, that is very much the wave of the future. Whether it be in Africa, whether it be in Brazil, or the rest of Latin America. I think that there are near-term and near-area opportunities in Australia and in regard to the nations of Southeast Asia. So I think that India is a hedge against the relationship going south with the United States. Needs to be able to look at those markets as well. You know, the history of the world is that if you can expand markets, you expand prosperity. The danger, of course, in regard to India is that it will be too much influenced by the President Trump approach and say, well, we're just going to operate bilaterally on an India first principle and forget the broad gauge approach, which India has been taking more and more multilaterally with international organizations, which need to be reformed, admittedly, but they don't need to be jettisoned and abandoned. So that's the way in which India can contribute. I think it's a great opportunity, if you will, for India, not just to try to keep its head down and appease President Trump, but to provide leadership in terms of the great principles that have been expressed historically about the world being one family, that what happens in other parts of the world are of concern to India. And I think India needs to fill in, if you will, some of the leadership which the United States is abandoning, both economically and strategically.